Welcome back to my Zurich 1953 tournament series. In this video, we're going to be looking at round number 2, and the way that this series works is I'm going to pick my favorite games from each round, and I'm going to be analyzing those games. So here, there were two games that really stood out to me. It was game number 9 and game 12, so we'll be looking at these two wonderful games. So let's jump into game number 9. It was Geller against Euwe, and this game actually won a brilliancy prize. It was so spectacular, and you'll see what I mean when we get to the moment. So it started with d4, c4, and knight to c3, just the most common opening. This opening has taken over this tournament so far. We have b6 from black with the idea of developing this bishop to the long diagonal, and early on, this is very powerful, not only for the bishop later in the middle game, but also in the opening. It sometimes forces white to play some moves that they wouldn't normally play. So here, f3 to defend this g2 square is important to play, and probably white would not have played it otherwise. So it's a very nice developing move by black. Now knight to c6, knight to e2, castles, castles, and knight to a5, going for this c4 pawn, realizing that it is a big weakness in many positions here for white, and it's going to be challenging for white to hold it onto it. Now in this position, e4 was played, and this is a pretty critical move because white is expanding in the center, and there's already some ideas for white that might not be so comfortable. For example, bishop g5 and e5 could come. There's also ideas of d5. So here black played an ugly looking move, knight e5, but it's actually indeed very smart. It's stopping all of these ideas I just mentioned with e5 and bishop g5, and it's also preparing to attack with f5 at the right moment and get some space in the king side. So white continued with knight to g3 with the idea of basically guarding f5, making it that much harder to get away with. And now pawn takes, and rook to c8. Again, you identify a weakness, you want to go for it. And this is one of the most critical moments of the game because here white essentially told black, go for this pawn. It's all yours. But in exchange, I'm going to be sacrificing it to get a quick attack. And this is really what shaped the rest of the entire game, this decision here. So he played f4. Black took the pawn happily, and then f5. And just by these two moves, f4 and f5, white has opened up the position in a way that will allow for future attacks. The bishop is now open. This bishop as well can easily become opened in many lines, as you'll see. The queen has access towards this diagonal, which it previously did not, and obviously the rook as well has ways into the position now. So here f6 was played, and this is certainly reasonable. The idea, well, there's a couple of ideas. First of all, very importantly, if the queen were to ever, in some case, take on h7, it's super important for the king to have this f7 square. And this is a huge thing, and you'll see later in the game that this is indeed a very important free square for the king. So generally making these breathing room, these breathing pockets, if you will, for the king is a smart idea. And then also black could potentially place a rook here, right? Or if the queen ever comes here, the queen would also be able to defend. So it gives black some more flexibility when it comes to their defense. However, it does come with a lot of downsides as well. Specifically, the queen no longer sees h4. So something like rook f4 is even more powerful now because there's some serious threats that are starting to develop. And so after f6, rook to f4 was played immediately. And this is, I'd say, the second most critical moment in the game because here black made a choice that really shaped the rest of the game. So black can try to really take up two mentalities here. They can either go super defensive and calculate all of these, defensive ideas and see which one seems to hold on the best. But black didn't want to do this. They wanted to go for a more fighting spirit, and so they played the move b5. And the best defense, as the quote goes, is offense. And so here, the idea is to actually counterattack along this diagonal here. So not only are you solidifying your knight, which is a nice byproduct, but the main point is to give the queen a way in to the game. So I thought this was super smart and a very nice resource in this position. So rook to h4 was played. White continues with their plan. Queen to b6. And you can already see that white does not have the freedom that they would like because of this counterattack. So something like queen to h6 or queen to h5 is not really possible here, because after queen takes d4, I mean, black can even just take the rook on a1, and again, because of this move f6, the king has breathing room. Queen takes h7, king to f7. Maybe the king doesn't want to be here, but hey, black's up a rook, so this would not be good for white at all. So for that reason, instead of queen h5, a very nice defensive resource was played here, the move e5. Very subtle defense of the pawn on d4 with the rook now. And the nice thing about this move e5 is that it also aims to open up a little bit the king side. So you can imagine some sort of trades in this tension with these pawn cubes here that could expose this king. And so just visually, that should make some nice sense here, why e5 makes a good move. Now the knight took on e5 because, of course, the pawn is pinned, but white doesn't really care. They took here on e6, again, opening up black's king. Knight takes the bishop, queen takes the bishop, and now I think a lot of people with the black pieces, I mean, what would you play? Probably something like g6 here, right, to close off this diagonal. However, when white has so many pieces here, it's super tricky to find a proper defense. So something like g6 wouldn't actually work in view of bishop h6, and white totally infiltrates. If you try to block with the knight, because you can't really move the rook, obviously, so if you try to block with the knight, well, then even something like bishop takes, king takes, and I believe knight f5 even works here. And if pawn takes, then you can even just continue very simply by taking the pawn here. No even need for check, because check will come in some way here, and it's going to be game over. And alternatively, if the king moves, it should be noted that the queen can also attack from the h-file now. So why am I showing this? It's to show that white has some nice attacks going here, so black's only chance is practically to counterattack. Going defensive here won't really help the situation. So queen takes e6. And now the move queen takes h7, king to f7, and bishop h6 was played here. Because queen to h5 really doesn't work here. Simply g6 and the knight can come to g7, and actually this is arguably even better because, well, okay, bishop h6, simply rook to g8 defends, and now black has kind of untangled a little bit. You kind of enjoyed, as white, the knight being here, stopping the rook from moving. Black was in a very claustrophobic situation, but now black has gotten some breathing room, and now it's really just going to be up to black to start to attack, and this could be a little bit dangerous for you. So instead of going for this, in this position, bishop h6 was played. And now came the defining move of this game, the move that really made this game earn the Brilliancy Prize. I mean, this was spectacular. Here, black played the move rook to h8. And, I mean, okay, just by the nature of the move, giving away a rook definitely deserves some explanation. So, what's going on here? Well, logically, the idea was this. White has some nice attacks going on, while black can't really get much attacks going, specifically because the queen is a really nice defender here. The queen really doesn't allow the rook to infiltrate with a devastating effect. And so by playing rook to h8, not only are you halting white's attack a little bit, because the queen would have preferred to be here. In various attacking ideas, the queen does prefer to be on h7. So not only are you halting white's attack and sort of messing up their piece coordination, but more importantly, you're taking the queen out of the game. I mean, the queen's on h8. The queen is no longer an effective defender. And for that reason, for the time being, I mean, if black can make use of 3 moves, let's say, that it would take white to really untangle here, black would be in perfect shape. So they start launching an attack here, rook to c2. Perfect. Again, taking advantage of the horrible placement of the queen, totally out of the game. So rook c2. and there's tons of pressure on g2. Not a great way to defend it, so here rook c1 was played, which is an inaccuracy. Better was d5. You can't really blame white for not seeing this. I don't know if white even considered it because it looks crazy. But what happens, well, if bishop takes, the point is rook to d1 now, attacking the bishop, and after takes, the truth is this isn't actually that dangerous. Black can even take the bishop here, and if queen takes, I mean, white is totally fine here. Even though this seems a little bit scary, everything is tied down, right? The rook is kind of tied down to the bishop, so if you were to ever take, there's some tactic there maybe. The king is super unsafe, so there's all these checks. So overall, this would actually be okay for white. So that would have been fine. And if the queen just moves, it should be noted, like queen to b6 check, king h1, and the king actually hides. And even though, sure, after queen f2, rook to g1, it's a little not pleasant, there's a nice tactical idea here. Rook to e4, cutting the bishop's diagonal. And after takes, I mean, after this mass, just eventful thing that has just occurred in the last 5 to 10 moves, we reach a really sort of pleasant position for white. I mean, now white is really going to be attacking. If you notice black's pieces, well, they're all already on their effective square aside from this knight, and it takes a lot of time to get the knight into the game, especially when it has such an important role here. So really, white will continue attacking here. Black does not really have an ability to. So that would have been good with d5, but rook to c1, and now it's all falling apart because of check. King f1, queen to b3, super precise idea. A check here, a check here. Just the queen is perfectly placed in this position, and again, the queen is totally out of the game. I mean, you can imagine if the queen was really on any other square, it would have some way to maybe come in and aid. Okay, I mean, queen to c2 here would not work, but, you know, even ideas like queen here would help the case in certain situations. And so just the horrible placement of the queen is such an important factor here that it was worth giving away a rook for it, because now this attack is unstoppable. King e1 was played in the game, but after queen f3, it's totally game over. Here actually white resigned, but just to illustrate why, suppose that, let's say a4 is played, just a random move, queen f2 check, and here various mates like rook g1 and takes on f1, or bishop here, knight blocks, and queen takes. So because of all these threats, it was justified to resign in this position. So this was a huge, just an incredible game here by black. First, distracting the queen with this move, rook h8. And even if objectively it's not the best move, the idea, make sure you understand it. Distracting the queen from A, pinning this pawn, and attack is therefore also less powerful, but B, from really coming back as a key defender, which is super important in all of these positions. And then black capitalized on the misplaced queen really perfectly here, launching really precise attacks. So I really enjoyed this game. Let's move on to the second game that I found really amazing in this round. Now, game number 12 is the second game that I found incredible in this round, and I actually already knew this game previously. I actually made a video about this game on my channel a while ago because it's one of the most common, popular, famous games of history. So I'll go through it today, but I don't want to be that repetitive because I've already made a video, so I'll go more briefly through this game. And if you're interested in a more detailed analysis, feel free to check out the video. I'll leave a link in the description. So Petrosian has the black pieces, and for this time I'll switch to the black side just because the whole idea appears in black's side. So up until here, I mean, white has played this well, gotten a lot of space in the center, the two pawns specifically, right, with the ability to be pushed forward. Also, this bishop, super powerful, the queen in the game. I mean, this is just a perfect position for white, you could say, aside from this bishop, but even that bishop has a lot of potential to reroute in one way or another. So definitely white's doing better here. And, oops, sorry. So definitely white is doing better here. And that is why black had to make a very important decision. So after bishop g4, the queen moved to e8, we had e5, first we had a5, and then rook to d8, and here is the critical moment. After rook to e1, black made a decision that is one of the most famous decisions, I would say, of all time, definitely one of the most famous sacrifices of all time. Played rook e6. What's the idea? Well, Petrosian realized a couple of things. First, this knight, it's not doing anything. It's the worst piece here, arguably, for black, and it would take a lot of moves to get it somewhere useful. He would much rather have used this square on e7 and then propel the knight to d5, and now it's a super powerful knight. This bishop, it's powerful along these light squares, but it has a contender for the light squares with this bishop on g4. So if you could remove this bishop, that would also amplify the power of this one. And finally, these pawns are too powerful. You know, right now they have, in the current state, they can be pushed forward, specifically e6 with the also weakness of this diagonal. I mean, you can see how these pawns can quickly cause a lot of harm to black's side. So for that reason, Petrosian played rook e6. Now, this actually just simply solves all of the problems I just mentioned. Because after, a4 was played first, but ultimately after bishop takes, pawn takes, what has happened? Well, these pawns are now stuck. They don't really have that luxury to be pushed forward as easily. This knight immediately gets a much better placement for itself, with coming to d5, aiding these pawns down the board. And this bishop, like I mentioned, now is totally dominating on all of these light squares. And so for those three facts alone, this is already a justified exchange sacrifice. And these are really the exchange sacrifices that I think people need to be more open to, because in the end of the day, material is irrelevant if positionally you are winning to such an extent that it's basically impossible for your opponent to come back. And this is what happened here. Let's look at how this continued. Queen to f1, knight comes in, and the bishop comes in. Here, white was forced to basically give back the exchange, otherwise they would be blown off the board with these pawns, and we can look at that. If they try to save their queen here, even b4, right, and takes, you could take the pawn even, right, stack your rook, save your rook on d8, and then trade the rooks off, and even c3 wins here because of this nice check, and then promote. So the point is, if white tried to stay with the material advantage, they would lose miserably. So they took back, and now it's just more of a drawn position, because even though there's these two passed pawns for both sides, super easily stopped from both sides. And I just think this is one of the most instructive and educational positional games of all time, because you need to think so creatively to come up with these ideas. But I mean, once you see enough of these exchange sacrifices, they will come more naturally. So hopefully you guys enjoyed these two games. I thought that this round number 2, was filled with two beautiful gems that I just explored. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I will see you next time. Peace out.